Once again, thank you very much, Tobias, for joining us, for being with us. It's such a great pleasure and a true privilege to be here, to meet you. And on behalf of this group, we are very, very grateful for the generosity, and this is the right word, the generosity of sharing your precious time with us. And well, we are above all thrilled to be here with you. We know that you receive many invitations, and also this only makes us even more grateful for the opportunity of having this conversation. And this, Tobias, is a group composed by business and thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies and institutions. Most of them basically are on boards of directors or C-level. And under this leadership program, Tobias, we are debating critical issues every month based on a book that serves as a sort of a reference, as a framework for our conversations. And on top of that, we have these special sessions with leading thinkers like yourself, who are, our guides to think better and of course to act accordingly. And for the sake of starting this event in a more formal ways, folks, I would like to highlight that Tobias is the author of this newly released, and I would say wonderful and quite timely book, You Can Culture, Transformative Leadership Habits for a Thriving Workplace, Positive Impact, and Lasting Success, which I think, of course, it's what every organization should aspire. And based on the text that it is in your website, Tobias, the Heart Management website, it says that having grown up in a religious cult and later confronted with a toxic culture, Tobias evolved into a prominent advocate for the vital importance of cultural health for organizational success and human flourishing. And his advice is sought after by leaders facing their most daunting culture challenges, such as, for instance, after scandals, corporate scandals, and also when navigating into a period of rapid growth. And Tobias is the co-founder of Heart Management, culture change agency, and he has designed, high-impact culture and leadership programs and trained thousands of people in values-driven leadership across the world. And his clients include many purpose-driven large organizations and corporations. So, and just to conclude, Tobias hosts the top-ranked Leading Transformational Change podcast, which I strongly recommend. So it's a wonderful podcast that Tobias hosts. And so he features, conversations with renowned researchers, executives, and experts in culture, management, and ethics. So Tobias, without further ado, and based on our previous exchange, I'm going to kick off this conversation with 4 or 5 questions and then open for other questions from the members of our group, whom I also greet and thank very much for being here. Okay, Tobias? Ready?
Sounds awesome. Yes.
So I'd like to start off our conversation with, of course, your motivations to write your beautiful and timely book. So in particular, you begin this book with a powerful and impactful personal story that explains how you ended up dedicating yourself to organizational culture and ethical leadership. So could you please share a little bit about your story and your motivation for writing You Can Culture?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Alexandra. And I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and honor to be with all of you. And also I think it's such a great thing that you're doing to really spend the time and focusing in on these super important questions. I have a bit of a cold, so if you hear me coughing a bit, that's why. So I apologize in beforehand. But so I start the book with a bit of my personal story and basically going back to I think now 17 years ago in 2008. I was watching this investigative program on Swedish television, and while the image was blurred and her voice distorted, I saw my mother tell a national broadcast audience how she, as a member of a Christian community that over time turned into a religious cult, like you mentioned, Alexandre, and where my mom became isolated and demonized and ultimately tried to end her life several times as a way of escaping from the terror and the trauma of this environment. I grew up in that community. I learned to revere that very destructive, manipulative founder, and I became a part of that very toxic culture, even as it tore our family apart. And I've had to wrestle so much with questions like, how could an organization that it seemed, driven by this noble mission and purpose turn into something so toxic? And how could I, who saw myself as an ethical and values driven person, if I look back, become complicit in psychological abuse, even of my own mother. And these questions are really what set me on the journey of focusing on culture as I was working many years ago with strategic communications and things like that. And I started to see the importance of really understanding what is it that truly drives an organization. What is it that is almost like this kind of inner life within an organization that has such an impact on its ability to reach its objectives, but also on the well-being of employees and also on the ethical conduct or the responsible conduct or irresponsible conduct of the organization. And that really led me on a journey. What I realized is that, I mean, while so few organizations end up in such an extreme story as the one I told, so many organizations, I think, suffer from challenges with unhealthy culture, and that might manifest in so many different ways. And I'm thinking about all of you sitting here. I'm sure you've seen perhaps some of the ways in your current or former organizations. We see this, maybe toxic environments, or we see quality issues, or we see problems with unethical behavior and or or compliance challenges, or we see, infighting between different departments, or whatever that might look like, and a lack of responsibility for results, or there's so many different things, and they have such an incredible impact on an organization. So that was really the starting point for me to wanting to write this book. And I should also say that I met so many people in organizations who felt that culture, yes, we understand that it's important, but it also feels like so difficult to understand what can we actually do to change it. And that's what I felt, okay, that's my mission. That's what I need to kind of commit my professional life to. And that's what I've tried to really make practical in my book and through our work.
Wow, fantastic, fantastic, Tobias. And please let me also thank you for kindly send me a copy of your book. It was quite steamed here. And I would like to go on, Tobias, here, talking about, your concept of cultural health, because you emphasize the importance of developing this cultural health in organizations. So how do you define, cultural health? And what, I don't know, qualities or indicators may suggest that an organization indeed has a cultural health?
Yeah, great question, Alexandra. And as I was looking at that question and writing the book and through our work, and I had the opportunity over 7 years to talk to so many researchers and who've really focused on these topics, talked to executives, I talked to whistleblowers, to so many people, both involved with very thriving organizations, also involved with some of these big corporate scandals that we read about in the news over the last number of years. And what I tried to get to the bottom of what is then cultural health, I defined it basically in three different qualities in a sense. So one is a culture that enables us as an organization to successfully deliver on our objectives and our strategy. And connected to that area, of course, there might be many different things. So those might differ from organization to organization. For example, it might be our ability to collaborate. It might be our ability to innovate. It might be our ability to work, for example, within a very highly regulated environment, or whatever that might look like. So I think there are certain things that are, most of the time common for most organizations. Most organizations see collaboration as an important value in their organization. But it looks very different depending on if you're a startup, or you are a pharma, a large multinational pharma company. Then the second thing is employee thriving. So that a healthy culture or cultural health enables us to create an environment where employees thrive. And again, there are so many aspects of that we could talk about. I would say psychological safety is one very critical one, but where people can be in a psychologically safe environment where they are able to do their best work and they're not hindered by organizational dysfunction and or toxic environments and toxicity in organizations. And there's several studies, for example, by two researchers at MIT who looked at the impact of toxicity in an organization and of the culture. And it has an incredible impact in terms of getting people to want to leave the organization. So that's the second thing. And the third thing then is the responsible impact that a cultural health uh, enables, or a culture where responsible decisions and ethical conduct are promoted. So those three different aspects is the business mission success, it is the employee thriving, and it is the responsible impact that I see signifies cultural health.
Wow, fantastic, Tobias. And of course, culture and leadership are sort of two sides of the same coin. So in your book, you argue that a thriving culture is both built by short-term initiatives, but primarily like an exercise, by a change in leadership habits. So could you please elaborate a little bit about this? And you have four proposed leadership habits, right, to build a healthy
Yeah.
culture. So, could you please share what these practice or strategies are, and how do you recommend it for leaders to, effectively kind of embed these habits?
Yeah. Great question. And so I think that, like, I'm sure for many of you, you've seen these, initiatives in organizations where, okay, we see a need to change, transform, renovate, whatever you want to say, an element of the culture of an organization. And, it's delegated to HR. They create some initiatives. We do some workshops. We do an annual event where we talk about our values or whatever that is. But then again, you've seen that it often doesn't at all lead to much results. And I would say even more so that sometimes, or perhaps even many times, it actually leads to negative results, because it only tells the organization that we are hypocrites, that we don't actually are going to, deliver over time, live up to the things that we say are important to us, and especially when they're put under pressure. So I was asking myself, what does it then mean to drive that change that actually becomes sustainable? And there is where I think the picture of health is so important and so helpful. Because when you think about our physical health, we understand that our physical health is not built on, the short-term things, that we go to the gym once and then lay on the couch, or that we, eat a salad once and then just eat pizza. It's the things we repeatedly do. And the same is true of the health of our culture. The culture in our organizations, it is shaped, and you could say it's also shaped by incentives and things like that, but it is also very much shaped by the signals that leaders at all levels in an organization send on what is encouraged, rewarded here, what is perhaps turned a blind eye to here, what is tolerated even though it shouldn't, and what are things that we don't accept in this environment. And those signals are sent constantly. And if we want to change those signals, we need to change the habits. And I can take one example. For example, if we say we want a culture where people speak up, that's great, important message. We send that message to the organization and say, speak up. We create the speak up channels and all of that. But if the signals that are sent on a daily basis in an organization that don't tell people. And I know for many of you, you are, representing large organizations, maybe large multinational corporations, for example, that if the signals around the world in all these different parts of your organization don't encourage people, don't solicit the feedback, don't actually invite people to bring up their concerns, you're going to have silence. So in the book, I talk about 4 habits: get humble, get clear, get integrity, get listening, and get integrity. And I start with getting humble, and that is something that so many people have asked me about. Why did you define that habit, and why did you start with it? And I'm sorry, and connected to each habit, I talk about 3 practices to each habit to make it really practical. And to get humble, what I realized is that if you are to truly change the culture of an organization, you have to start with humility. You have to start moving away from the assumption, oh, but that we are a great organization with great values and a healthy culture, and instead realize that your organization, your leadership is vulnerable, that you can't just assume health. You instead have to assume that there will always be challenges, and you need to invite the signals that can help you know where you veer off track. And when I think about, for example, working with organizations that have gone through scandals, and I think about one specifically, this was in the US, and where this very highly publicized scandal. And when I met with the new leadership team, I said that I'm sure you're now going to put process in place to make sure that this thing doesn't happen again. But what I want you to think about is, why did you react the way you did when credible people were over several years raising concerns, but you didn't listen? And that's exactly where that getting humble starts, to embrace vulnerability, to take ownership instead of thinking, oh, this is just some bad apple, or this is someone somewhere. Ask yourself as leaders and even board members, since we have them in the room here, what is my part? How can I take ownership? And the third thing there is to repair broken trust, that in every organization, in every leadership journey, there will be the moments where we don't act in line with our values. What we do in those moments matters incredibly much. Are we willing to take ownership, and are we willing to apologize for the way we lack integrity? And I write in the book of Professor Sandra Sucher's research. She's at Harvard, has done fantastic research on trust, and I interviewed her several times for the book, and she shows this really fantastic process to regain trust in an organization, and how it can even be stronger as you go through. I've seen that. I've seen the examples in organizations that have gone through extremely difficult scandals, challenges, where the willingness to take ownership, where the willingness to get humble, where the willingness to actually repair the broken trust in a significant way, take ownership of the culture, and start the journey of change, led to remarkable results. So the second habit is to get clear. And what I want to say there is that most time, organizational values mean very little, and they're not enforced. And for values to be valuable, they have to be lived out. And I say in the book that values that aren't allowed to cost us something aren't worth anything either. So for our values to become valuable, they need to be clear principles that help tell us, what should we prioritize? What should we do in situations where we stand between these competing objectives? And the reality is that no values can tell us that in every situation. So what they should do, what our values should do, is invite robust conversations about difficult dilemmas. What they instead do in many organizations is that they have become kind of this thing that HR or other parts of the organization uses to kind of get people a bit inspired about some nice words. But that's not what values and principles are about. So the first thing there is to make values matter. And the second thing is what we often don't do very well in organization is to celebrate when we see people actually acting in line with the behaviors and the values we want to see. And there are very simple things we can do to make sure we do that well. And so many times, even though it's such an obvious principle, when I talk to leaders, they're not strategic about how they do it. And the third practice there is to deal with unhelpful and destructive behavior. And I've seen so many times in organizations when they call us in because they see a challenge in their culture, and that is so clearly connected with their willingness to allow a certain people with certain, I don't know whether it's that they have certain education or a certain level in the organization, or they have certain sales numbers, allow them to act in a way that is completely out of line with the values. And oftentimes, the minorities in the organization suffer the most. And again, it sends the signal to the organization that we don't stand up, I'm sorry, for our values when it really matters. The third habit is to get listening. And I talked a little bit about that before, but I think so many times as leaders, we just assume that if people have something to say, they're going to come to us and say it. And we think, I mean, I'm non-threatening. It's not an issue to bring things up with me. But what I've realized is that, and there's a lot of research to back that up, that our power so easily silences other people. And that there's a lot of things that because we have a formal leadership or sometimes informal leadership position, that people won't actually come and tell us, which means, and again, and I said that to a leadership team just the other day, that silence doesn't mean that people aren't talking, but it means that there's certain important things that aren't being said. So if we want to get them up on the table, we need to solicit the feedback. We need to create conditions for brave conversations, and we need to empower people to actually learn how to give voice to their values in a confident and constructive way. And the fourth habit is to get integrity. And when we think about signals that shape culture, there are three different signals that are really important. And one is the stories that we tell. What are the stories that we tell in an organization about what success looks like? Who are the who are the people who are kind of are the heroes here? Who are kind of the villains in this organization? What does that tell us? And how are we actively telling the story of our organization? I give many examples about that in the book. The second thing is in our rituals. And again, so many times when we think about culture and values, it ends up, in this, annual meeting where we have our kind of corporate values day and we talk about our values. But what I want to encourage teams and organizations to do is to instead make it a part of the things that you repeatedly do. If you create a ritual, for example, as a leadership team, that when you meet, that you on top, I mean, and you have many important things on your agenda, but that you also ask yourselves, where have we acted in line with our values, and where are there challenges, or where have we perhaps started to veer off course? What are the decisions that we're making where we need to stop? And I'm sure in this journey, you've talked about a lot of the ways we kind of lose sight of our values, like ethical fading, how we just put it in the frame. This is a financial decision. This is whatever type of decision, legal decision, whatever it might be. But where we're very intentional about actually putting our values and the ethical perspectives on the table in our discussions, and we make that a ritual. So that is such a critical thing. And the third thing there is to think through our processes and incentives and make sure that they don't send signals that are in conflict with what we say that we should value and the culture we want to build. So that was a very long answer to your question, Alexandra.
That's absolutely fantastic. So get clear, right? Get
Yeah.
humble, get clear, get listen, get integrity. So it's strong, and it's all marked up, huh? That's the book. So, and then Tobias, I'm going to hand over to Angela. You know that I have many more questions to ask you, and I also invite all the members of our group. Please make use of this opportunity. Raise your hands to ask questions, okay? To Tobias, and also just you mentioned about humbleness. Last month we had a conversation with Ed Hess, which is a professor, and he wrote a book called Humility is the New Smart. So it's totally aligned with what you said. And
Beautiful.
also, Yes, and 2 months ago we had the honor of speaking with Peter Senge, the legendary author of Fifth Discipline, and he mentions that we tend to blame the culture out there, but as you said, we have to take ownership. We are the culture, right? So that's one of the critical points. So Angela, please.
Yes, in this sense, Tobias, I wanted to hear more about what do you think about the psychological safety that is needed for directors and managers in a large sense, and not just for employees to be safe in this cultural health, the qualities that you mentioned, because at least we have this vision that the culture must be set from the top to the bottom. So if the managers, they think they are perfect, so they won't have they won't get any mistake to be seen, but it will, of course, they will have mistakes. So I wanted to hear you about this, the need for us to assume our vulnerability as managers, as CEOs. For instance, more than 90% of the CEOs think they listen well and they hear well the people, but only 30% of the people say that they are listened to. So we have that big gap between what we think, we overestimate ourselves, and what we really have, what we really behavior in that sense. So what are your thoughts about this?
Great question, Angela. And of course, just like you say, that we often, I think, miss this on higher levels of organizations. And in my work, I think so many times I see that there's a very clear lack of that psychological safety in the executive team. And that has such big influence on the organization overall. There's a lack of trust. And I think a part of that is that I think we don't take relationships seriously. We don't we as we go through and working in high stakes environments, there's a lot of challenges and all of that. We have these kind of breaches in trust in between us as a group, but we never take the time to address them. And I see so many times how these trust breaches over time, how they create this environment where everyone is a bit scared. And it's not like on the surface everyone is like, they're cool, everything's great. But if you dig a bit deeper, and I mean, let's say, for example, I've done that many times. You interview the different members of the executive team, you will start hearing and you'll start realizing that there's actually a lot of things going on. And then so many times, for example, an organization might say, we want to improve collaboration. But then when you start working with the executive team, you realize that they don't collaborate, that instead they go out and they say one thing in their meetings, and then they go out and say very different things to their different parts of the organization. For example, the people who might lead different business units or whatever that is. So this is difficult, of course, because there's we are afraid, and I think that's the reality. We're afraid of being seen as incompetent. We're afraid of other uh, people seeing through us, or losing our position within the group or whatever. But I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to model that vulnerability, model that humility, and because I don't see any other way to start. And I was recently, with a group of leaders where someone asked to the group, what do I need to do to be trusted in this group? And of course, that's a very vulnerable question, but it's also a very powerful question. And suddenly everything, the whole kind of dynamics in the group changed. And suddenly we're not talking about general issues, we're talking about real issues. And they're often also down there on a relational level. So I want to encourage like two things. One thing is to take the relational aspects of this seriously. Like Professor Edgar Schein would say that ultimately culture is built on trusting relationships. And often we have all these breaches of trust between us. We don't think there's such a big deal. We just move on. We think, I mean, we shouldn't be emotional people. We shouldn't have, this shouldn't be an issue for us. We're confident and all those things, and we just move on. But that breach is still there. And taking the time to deal with it, booking a lunch with somebody, having a conversation with someone, and just saying that conversation we had, I didn't feel like it went in the right way, and I didn't feel like I expressed myself in the right way, and or whatever that might look like. So doing that, and another thing is modeling vulnerability, and of course, from the higher your level kind of or position in the organization, in many ways, the more powerful it becomes when you're willing to show that vulnerability, when you're willing to show that you don't have all the answers, and that you're willing to show that you're getting it wrong, and when you do that in an authentic way.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Brilliant. Dr. Jamal, please.
Well, thank you for being with us, Mr. Tobias. When there is a major scandal caused by an employee of large corporations, the large corporations always go to media and say, well, our employees' behavior does not reflect our company thinking, does not reflect our culture. Okay. Usually are very successful companies, financially successful companies. And we know that the success of the company is not only financial, but for all stakeholders. But we are talking of smart people. We're talking of CEOs of big companies, thousands of people, working employees. So why they are still paralyzed? They listen to you, they listen to us, they read. And I know you are in a wonderful, and we are in a wonderful line to go to the success of all stakeholders. But we know that these CEOs, they are smart. They are intelligent. Why they are still paralyzed? What is happening?
Such a great question, Jamal. And I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think that one of the things that I see is that CEOs and boards and executive teams, I think, often hide behind legal liability. So legal liability becomes kind of this excuse in a sense to not address things properly. But what I think is very, very important is, of course, the legal liability aspect of something. I mean, that they want to say, want to protect the company, and they have to, assign blame to that specific individual, and they have to say that there's nothing wrong and all of that. But if people within the organization still know that there's something wrong, if people also perhaps outside the organization can feel that, I think the problem then is then the question of trust. And I think most CEOs that I meet, I mean, they understand that trust is business critical, and trust. And I now go back to Sandra Sucher's research again. Trust has to do with being seen as competent to deliver our product, services, and all of that. But it also has to do with being seen as what we would more say as being ethical. For example, that we take a responsibility for all the impact of our actions. So what I would encourage organizations to do is to separate the questions. So legal liability is like one question, but you can't handle everything with lawyers speak, because that's not going to be what rebuilds trust. So you have to ask the question, what is it that is needed to rebuild trust in this situation? And what I also think, what we see so many times is that companies, they have that gut reaction to put the blame there, and so thinking that they can quickly move forward. but then oftentimes they actually can't, because then, some weeks later, there's another article that sheds light on something more that has happened. And what I really, and I've seen this so many times, and I've been, communicating with leaders saying, like, don't do that. Don't go out and say that, because you don't, like, take the time first to ask the question, what is really the reality of what happened? Are there elements of your culture? Are there elements of your, I mean, if we take, I'm sure you're familiar with the Wells Fargo case, where they, fired thousands of people and still said that it didn't have anything to do with culture. It was just thousands of bad apples. And so I think that is so critical to see that often it's going to come back to bite you if you don't do that. And if you also think about the trust both internally and externally, and what the message your hypocrisy will send, and also, and I encourage leaders also to think this gives you actually a beautiful opportunity to see potential things. And it's not in every case. In some cases, it is just somebody who made a stupid decision, and that's it. But in many cases, there is something broader. And this gives you an opportunity to actually see that, which will help set you up to be able to strengthen cultural health for the future.
Wow,
But a
Tobias.
fantastic question. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And just before Luis and Michelle, I have a question that is related to this topic, because Tobias, you talked about trust and relationship, because trust is an outcome of a relationship, in particular of a long-term relationship. But we live in an increasingly transactional world. So I'd like to connect, business ethics with organizational culture, with managerial turnover, because ethics, of course, depends on this kind of long-term relationship connected with the reflection about the impact of our actions or omissions. But at the same time, we have seen executive turnover increasing a lot in the past decade. So although, of course, there is a lot of variation there depending on the industry, country, but we can roughly say that the average tenure of CEOs and senior managers nowadays revolves around to, 3 to 5 years. So my question is it realistic to expect, from executives under this great short-term pressure for financial results, and with such a short average tenure or expected tenure, to prioritize, decisions, for instance, about culture with longer term and collective benefits? So is managerial turnover or this high managerial turnover an enemy of an ethical culture? If you could please elaborate on that.
Great question. And I mean, so I've seen, scandals and problems with unethical behavior in organizations with leaders that have had a very high tenure, for example, or very long tenure, and where they've been able to build such a position in the organization that no one is willing to question them. So I just want to recognize that problem exists in every type, I think, of situation. But having said that, I do think you're absolutely onto something, and I think that it is, of course, a part of a challenge, and I think that's also for the board members in the room here, something also to reflect on. How does that kind of pressure, and also what are the signals we send in terms of what will get a CEO fired, and what we want and how we measure their results. So definitely, I think it's a very, very relevant question and a very relevant challenge. And of course, it also, you could say, connects to the question of whether I've worked with both, and then I'm sure we might have that represented here as well. Both large, for example, family-owned corporations and public companies. So that's of course a difference as well, where sometimes in the family-owned, even though they're very large multinationals, there's sometimes a bit of a longer perspective in terms of decisions and priorities and so on.
Wow, great. So Luis, please go ahead. Thank you.
I think Michael is in my first.
Yeah.
Should be first.
Yeah, Michelle is the first.
Michelle.
Okay. Thank you, Luis. Thank you.
Hi, Tobias. Thank you so much for being with us today. And my question goes a little, I would say, not higher. I mean, what you say sounds like music for me. But what we are living today in the international, in the leadership in the United States, and we're talking about humble, we're talking about repair the broken trust, we're talking about listening, and we are watching 100% the opposite of that. I think this is going to bring some, it's going to bring some problems or some questions for what we're living today. And this is going to companies also, it's going to bring new challenges for the companies and leaders. How do you see this? Can you comment something about that, please?
Just easy
Michelle,
questions, huh, Tobias?
yeah, yes, absolutely. No, Michelle, I mean, that's I think a very, very relevant question, and I think it's something that you know has really concerned me over I mean over a long time, and of course definitely over these last months, and where we see certain things. We see, for example, maybe walk back on commitments to enforcing corruption laws, and instead we see maybe even more corruption that is kind of almost publicly celebrated in a sense, and of course, like you say, we see so much of leadership that is not humble, that is not. So, what do we make of that? And I've also been thinking about what are the signals that are being sent, because I think now a lot of companies and also countries are saying we need to focus on our competitiveness, where we're lagging behind. We need to cut red tape. We need to deregulate. We need to do. And I'm sure that there's certain elements of that are relevant and also important. But having said that, I'm also wondering if this time kind of creates an opportunity for us. Yes, we are operating in an environment where our values truly do get tested, where it's not that easy to stand up for certain things. And the question is then, what are we then willing to build? What are we? And of course, as a European, I've been thinking a lot about that from a European perspective, like what will Europe's kind of response be to this when there's a certain picture of what companies should be about, what leadership should be about, that is kind of transmitted, and where we've seen, for example, a lot of the tech CEOs and so on who have kind of changed tack very quickly and kind of to kind of bow down to pressure and so on, or whatever that might be. And so I think it is a question for us all. What are we willing to build? And I guess for our countries, for our companies, and I don't think that the answers are easy, but I also do think that and then now I'm going to borrow from an ancient text, the Bible, and say that pride goes before fall. I do think that ultimately is true. That ultimately there are consequences. I do think that we will see, and we are seeing, an incredible consequences to the trust that if we take the US as an example, has had with the world, and how that's breaking apart very, very rapidly, and how I mean how other multilateral organizations and countries are seeing we have to rethink our relationship, and I do think that we're going to see the cost of that. So yes, but it's a very difficult question, and thank you for asking it.
Yes, great. Luis, please.
Okay, thank you, Tobias, for your explanation about healthy organization. I have been researching about mental health for a long time, and Brazil is very poorly positioned in the mental health rankings. We are on the top of the list of the most anxious, the second in the number of burnouts, and the fifth in the case of depressions. Employees with mental health problems are, in most cases, removed, and when they return after treatment, there is always a big problem of relocating them. With your experience, what do you think can be done in terms of culture to make this re-inclusion a welcoming way, in a soft way? I mean,
Yeah, oh, such an important question, and I don't know if I have really great answers to that, but I mean but generally I think the answers are the same as I've seen in most aspects or elements when you think about change. And I think one thing is we need leaders, and I think that's what we've seen in some countries where you see a start of change where leaders have started to be willing to talk about their own challenges with their mental health, and where they're starting to publicly share those stories, which is extremely difficult and in many environments. But I do think that's one thing that is really needed. I think another elements is that we would start to be intentional about celebrating people for caring about their mental health and for doing things that are actually important. And I'm afraid that we too much still, live in an environment where people are so easily discarded, and where yeah, I don't know. I think that we have seen, and I'm thinking just in the country where I'm from, Sweden, that we have seen a change in the view around mental health. And I think part of it has been leaders being willing to talk about their own challenges, and also just people like you who are focusing on making people aware of these questions. Because I think what so many times yeah, physical, we can see a broken leg, but we don't understand in the same way what it means to go through burnout or depression and all those things. So I think people like you who work to really put the spotlight on that, I think is really critical.
Wow, Tobias. And you know that I have another question, please. But you know that we have a kind of an idyllic view of the Nordic countries. So most of them think that there are no problems in the business world in the Nordic countries. No, there's ethics is perfect, and there's no toxicity, no toxic cultures. And so at least it's a sort of a relief for us to see that we share this about the same challenges, right? Here and there. And so, but Tobias, as we mentioned, we have many board members here in this group, and particularly independent directors of large companies. So, in your opinion, what is the role of the board of directors in fostering a healthy culture that is characterized by, ethical leadership, but across all levels of the organization? So, in what sense? Just to make a sort of a provocation, boards are sometimes part of the problem instead of the solution by creating incentive systems that are based on these aggressive individual bonuses without deeply asking how the numbers are being reached, from your experience.
No, Alexander, I think you answered the question. I think, I mean, part of it is exactly what you're saying, and I should say I'm not a board expert in any way, but what I've seen, and I think about one large company that we worked with where they had some recurring ethics and compliance challenges, and where we created this leadership program within the organization, and where which was very extensive and included just I think over 1,000 people. And then ultimately it was actually taken to the board for discussion there as well, and where longtime board members actually were reflecting on, so what is our responsibility here? How might the signals that we've been sending through the requirements we put on the CEO, on the leadership team, how might that have impacted? How might the psychological safety in our group to raise concerns have impacted? So if we think about that culture is so much shaped by signals, then I would encourage you as board members to think about what are the signals that you own and what are those signals telling. And just very recently, I was working with an organization where kind of with a part of an organization where there have been certain recurring challenges around ethical issues and so on, and where the thought was that oh, but we don't put any heavy requirements on them. We don't like, I mean, when it comes to performance or growth or something like that. But when talking to people within the organization, it still kind of became clear that, whenever they had conversations, those conversations were about the details of the numbers, which is of course extremely important, but there were no conversations. I mean, about other elements. So just to talk more about the how. And for example, let's say your company has a value that is integrity, for example, to more raise the question of, so how do the requirements we set and the signals that we send align with that element of integrity, and bring that up as a conversation point also in board meetings. And I think that could be really, really important to be able to drive positive change.
Wow, that's great. You know that in Brazil, we also have this conversation nowadays because we definitely have to understand that the board has a role in the ethical leadership of the organization, and also in as kind of an ultimate responsibility for the culture and the values of the organization. So I think that we're having about the same discussions here. Unfortunately, we are running out of the agreed time, but we have time here for another questions from Julio. Please, Julio, go ahead. Nice to see you.
Hey, thank you, Tobias. Actually, I worked for a Swedish company for 13 years.
Wow.
Talk to you. Yeah. My question is, I wanted to hear from you an advice that you would give to an executive who feels frustrated after working for an organization that talk a lot about values, culture, purpose, but the practices on an everyday, on the daily work, they contradict those words. The traditional. It doesn't happen to walk the talk. So how can that leader keep the hope alive, or act as a culture shaper without becoming cynical? My point. An advice to someone who feels that, because I know a lot of people in that situation. Thank you.
Yes. Julio, thank you for asking that question. And I think that is true of so many people. I have met so many people like that who are feeling like they're really, hitting their head against the wall and become frustrated, and also a fear becoming cynical. And I think that there are often, I mean, what we can do, I think, is to try to ask questions. And so if there are these purpose statements and these like to ask the questions of, so how is this aligning with what we say, like, and not doing it in a way that makes people feel put on the spot in a negative way. No one wants to be you know kind of labeled as being unethical or stuff like that. So do it in a way that's going to kind of encourage conversation without labeling people as unethical or bad or stuff like that. And then I think at some point, if you realize that those conversations are not landing, that those questions are not landing, then of course there might also be a place where you realize this is not a place where I really can drive the type of change that I want to see. But that would probably be my advice.
Great.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Tobias, of course, culture is timeless and, of course, timely subject, because it's basically the sum of how do we work here together, what do we value, what do we believe, and our hidden, I would say, beliefs, right? And that are our shared assumptions about our worldview. That's that I would say most of the time we don't even talk about it. And so friends, I strongly recommend Tobias' book, this You Can Culture, because it's also very practical. It's full of not only insights, but also a how-to, right, Tobias, because it's based on I would say more than a decade working with organizations. And so Tobias, once again, this was such a rich, insightful conversation. We are deeply grateful for the generosity. You have been very kind, particularly, kind since our first interaction. So in front of everyone here, I'd like to thank you. And I also would like to say that this, Angela, I would like to.
And I wanted to take a picture.
Oh, yeah, this is
Please.
very important.
Yes.
Wow.
For us to register.
Register this moment.
Yes, of course. So I'll count until 3. 1, 2, 3. So let's see. It's perfect.
Wow. Thank you,
everybody.
Angela.
Thank you so much, Tobias.
Yeah, and just say for me as well, just a big thank you, Angela, Alexander. This has been, and then to all of you, this has been a great honor, very inspiring conversation. I loved this, and thank you for all your thoughtful questions and engagement. And just want to say as well, I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So please find me there, connect with me. Would love to continue the conversation, and thank you for the important work you do for Brazil and for the world, and the different organizations you're a part of. It matters.
Oh, thank you so much.
You.
We're so glad to hear that,
too.
because
Thank you so much.
and we are really particularly glad because when we had this interaction, you already had heard about us, about this virtual leadership program from Guido Palazzo and other common friends. So this gives us strength that we are in the right path. So we, of course, Tobias, hope to listening and learning from you once again in the future, to being with you. It's been such a great pleasure, and I wish you a full recovery from your flu and a wonderful journey in Barcelona, which is such a beautiful city, one of my top 5 cities. And that's it. So thank you very much, and see you next time. It was such a memorable occasion.
Bye-bye.
And thank you everyone for being here until.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.